afternoon. Welcome to the Weekly Livestock Market Update. I'm Brownfield anchor reporter Meghan with this as always to talk all things markets. University of Missouri, Scott Brown. Good afternoon, Scott.
Good afternoon, Megan.
We are going to get into livestock slaughter, quarterly ag trade data today, cold storage numbers, and cattle on feed. All things that have some very interesting numbers and aspects of them. But to kick things off, let's recap what happened this week in the markets.
Yeah, Megan, it's good to talk about markets this week, as by and large, we've got a lot of positive news on the price side of the equation. If we start on the cattle side, those live fed cattle prices were nearly $3 higher this week. As we look at the feeder cattle auctions around the country, they were anywhere from steady to $2 higher on the week. On the future side, the April live cattle futures contract was up 80 cents, and the March feeder contract was up $2.60. We saw corn futures for March down 26 and a quarter this week that I think were a little supportive to feeder cattle prices. Choice box beef prices were nearly $11 higher this week. That was strength in all of the components in that choice box beef bundle. You look at choice box beef, it's now nearly $26 above year ago levels, maybe a precursor to what's to come with some higher prices. On the hog side, cash barrels and gilts were nearly $2 higher this week. The April lean hog futures contract closed up 62.5, and we also got strength in the pork cutout value, up nearly $3.10. Really, hams and bellies led the way for that higher pork cutout value.
When we look at that box beef number, we've talked about strength and rebuilding it and growing again. Are we in that sweet spot where we're seeing strength, which helps support prices, but it's also not getting things too far out of whack?
Well, so at least not yet. We're not talking about record choice box beef prices. Maybe we'll get there as we get further in the year, but thus far we've gotten some nice gains of late, getting us some growth relative to last year, and I think being supportive of cattle prices. You look at live fed cattle this week at almost $1.64. We haven't talked about those levels for a while, so some good news on that front.
All right, let's talk slaughter numbers, both cattle and hogs. And I will say there was some weather that moved through parts of the country, and I know impacted at least hog numbers one day this week.
Yeah, for sure. You look at what USDA is telling us for the week ending February 25th, a run of 618,000 head of cattle. That's down 9,000 from a week ago and down 33,000 relative to a year ago. On the hog side, a run of 2.375 million head this week. That's down 130,000 head from a week ago and 117,000 head from where we were a year ago.
First big report this week, livestock slaughter numbers. As we take a look at production, how are things shaping up compared to where they were a year ago?
Yeah, so if you look for January at beef production up 2.6% relative to Jan of 22, pork production up 6.4. We got some increases in that first month. Now, Jan of 23 had one more weekday than January of 2022, so maybe that had a little bit of impact on the higher numbers. When you look at the components, cattle slaughter up 4.7% January this year relative to a year ago. However, slaughter weights down 1.9%. So January of 22, we were at 843 pounds. We fell to 827 with January of 23 numbers. On the pork side, hog slaughter 6.9% higher in January. However, we did get a little bit of break with some lower slaughter weights, down a pound or 0.5% in terms of hog slaughter weights. To note for a second, monthly chicken production for January of this year up 7.4% relative to a year ago. Rebuilding happening on that front.
That's good to know. We'll have to watch what that does on the retail side of things as well.
Lots of meat for consumers potentially. Well, I shouldn't say lots of meat, lots of chicken relative to what they were used to last year, at least.
Quarterly ag trade outlook came out this week, and it's really an interesting conversation talking just about the numbers in general and all of the things that happen. Let's walk through the changes for the projections for fiscal year 2023.
Yeah, so if you look at what USDA gave us relative to their November forecast, they actually lowered the overall ag export value by $5.5 billion relative to November. When you look at livestock in particular, that down $0.6 billion relative to their November forecast. That really comes with what's lower beef, a little lower poultry, also some lower dairy product forecast, kind of leading the way for that lower number. Overall, 184.5 billion of ag export value. In FY22, we were at $196.4 billion.
Are we surprised to see this adjustment down after the kind of years that we've had leading up to 2023?
So I'm not terribly surprised we're seeing that, and a couple of things that I think are important to talk about. So when you look at back at FY22, we were at $196.4 billion off of a 21 number of 171.7. So some phenomenal growth in fiscal year 22 in particular. So the 184.5 that USDA is now projecting for FY23 doesn't look as far out of alignment, if you will, relative to where we were in 21. I will say stronger dollar for part of this time, as well as transportation issues. I think all those things have been somewhat at play and a slowing global economy as well here again. I think all those things have had some impact on what our ability to export here in FY23 looks like.
Two reports out today, cold storage and cattle on feed. And I don't want to say that they're kind of boring, but they're really not super exciting.
That's yes, correct. So I'm going to find a little belly good news for you, Megan, with your bacon interests. But overall, not a lot of big news here. And I'll start on the beef side. Beef ending stocks for January, frankly, were unchanged relative to a year ago. I'm actually kind of happy to see a little bit of that news in January, because if you remember, we had pretty good growth in both November and December beef ending stock numbers. The January numbers kind of stopped that growth. So maybe we aren't talking about building stocks any further. And I may talk about much smaller stocks as we go forward. On the pork side, we were down. We were up. Let me get the right direction. Up about 80 million pounds in overall pork ending stocks January of this year relative to a year ago. And the good news for Megan is that half of that, roughly, was what was higher belly stocks. So starting to rebuild belly stocks, and maybe those bacon prices continue to be at lower prices when you go to the store.
Let's hope. And I think it's interesting too when we talk about those bellies, the jump in belly stocks. Like, I think it's a pretty shocking number to see it, but then it's also, on the flip side of that, is equally shocking to see how much they had been drawn down.
So absolutely, Megan. You look. We were running pretty tight on belly stocks, and we've never held a lot of belly stocks, so it's not surprising we can get a lot of volatility there. Yes, we've rebuilt them, and in percentage terms, it's a large increase going from what was 45 million pounds in 2022 to 70 million pounds here in January of 23. But again, I wouldn't really pay too much stock into that large percentage growth, just given how small the base number is.
Cattle on feed numbers out today, and at first blush, really, if you read the pre-report estimates, you kind of knew it was going to happen.
Yeah, that's right. So number one, I'll say confirmation, right? So we continue to talk about overall lower cattle on feed inventory. You look at the February 1 number that USDA gave us today. They said 95.9% of a year ago. That was towards the lower end of the pre-report estimates, but again, pretty narrow range in terms of on feed numbers out of that report, but just continues to remind me to say, you can get further into 2023 and we're going to get a lot less slaughter-ready cattle available. When you look at placements, the report came in at 96.4% of a year ago, also a little below the midpoint of the pre-report estimates. So all in all, getting tighter as we get the February report here, or March report, I should say.
Let's talk a little bit about placements by weight. As you look into that report, anything that stands out to you there?
Yeah, so we're down 72,000 head in total in placements. When you start looking at some of the weight categories, Megan, 700 pounds and less, about 40,000 of the 70,000 down. So lighter weight placements, which 6 months down the road are going to be ready for slaughter. So we're down 5,000 head in the greater than 1,000 pound category, and also down 5,000 head in the 9 to 999 weight category. It keeps reminding me to say that this is all to come in terms of lower slaughter ready cattle, and we're just starting to see the real signs of that.
Things might be tight now, but they are only going to be shrinking as we move ahead.
And one could argue, Megan, so I've been on this discussion a lot of late, but if producers decide to retain heifers, and I'm not suggesting we get a big bump there, but if they were to decide that strategy, it gets even tighter as we get later into 2023.
It's that whole thinking about the percentage of heifers on feed, right? Like we've seen so many more go, and that's already up. And then if we're going to start to retain, we're going to pull from that pool even greater.
That's correct. But I will keep saying profitability, although it looks like we will have a reasonable profitable year for cow-calf producers, I'm not sure it's to levels that get many of them to expand too much from where they sit today.
Scott, as we look ahead to next week, what reports do we have out?
Yeah, so we'll get restaurant performance index next week, Megan, and we'll finish next week with a jobs report.
We will talk to you next Friday. Have a great weekend, Scott.
You do the same, Megan.
So our weekly livestock market update delivered to your email box every Saturday morning at brownfieldagnews.com. And to get updates on what's going on daily in the commodity markets, make sure to check out John Perkins' Market Minute, also at brownfieldagnews.com. Have a great weekend. I'm Meghan Grabner for Brownfield.